Hi, I'm Jill Deacon. Welcome to another episode of A Love Affair with the Unknown. This week, I'm excited to introduce you to actually someone you may already know from the world of podcasting. Chris Duffy is the host of the very popular How to Be a Better Human podcast. He's a comedian, he's an author, he's a former fifth grade teacher, all of which sets him up with a really interesting perspective on uncertainty and navigating unknowns. Chris is a big believer that we all need to laugh at ourselves a little more, take ourselves less seriously, take more risks, be willing to get laughed at, and have more laughter in our lives. And he has really interesting thoughts on how that kind of attitude really shapes our relationship with uncertainty and control. He says he learned a lot of this perspective from the students that he used to teach in elementary school. It's a great conversation. I'm so excited to share it with you this week. Enjoy Chris Duffy and his love affair with the unknown. Chris Duffy, great to have you with us. Thank you so much for being part of this love affair with the unknown.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here.
Having a pro podcast. I see we found you in your studio, your podcasting studio.
That's right. Yes, I have my full setup here.
Nice. There's so many things about the way you approach life that fit right in with our conversations about navigating all of the unknowns of life, the macro and the micro. But I feel like I want to start with one, which is your sense of humor. You're a comedian, and that's so integral to who you are and how you approach life. And you've seemed to have made it in some ways your life's work to get more people to be embrace laughter and find humor in your life. What do you think gets in the way? Because we all want to laugh more, don't we? What do you
Yeah.
think gets in our way?
Wow. Well, I think so much gets in the way of us laughing, but at the same time, it's such a natural thing, right? Like kids laugh, babies laugh. It's not like it's not like you have to learn how to do this. This is something that comes really natural. But I think the thing that comes in the way, the biggest is, somewhere along the way as adults, we get the message that like someone laughing at you means that is something you should be embarrassed by, right? That you should be taken seriously and that you're important and you're not a clown. And for me, one of the biggest joys of identifying as a comedian, not even like performing comedy or any of the professional bonuses, is just getting to have this title where I say it and then I say, if you laugh at me, I like that. That's what I want, right? If I say something foolish and you laugh, I go, that's great. I want to be a buffoon. I want you to laugh at me. And I think it really puts people at ease. It's like the opposite of saying like, I'm a serious genius. When you say I'm a comedian,
Right,
people are like,
right.
okay, well, this guy's just a joke. And it lets people talk to you in a different way, which is the biggest thing I love about it.
Well, and it's interesting because your ability to own that
Mm.
and to be comfortable with being laughed at is obviously part of what draws you to being a comedian. But it's interesting psychologically too, because so much of the discomfort that we feel around all kinds of uncertainties
Mm.
traces back to the fear of being sort of shunned from our community and being laughed at. Like if we can't handle this or we can't make it or we can't, we have some underlying fears that drive a lot of our anxieties and uncertainties about navigating unknowns. But being laughed at can make us at some primal level presumably feel that I'm going to be shunned from the community, so which is why we don't like it. So you've somehow done a workaround.
Yeah, I think that idea that shame and vulnerability and this fear of exclusion or loss are things that stop us from having a sense of humor. I think that's really accurate and profound. Um, it's funny because even just thinking about the very title of your show, right? Like a love affair with the unknown. I think that for many people, myself included, it's really like a love-hate affair with the unknown, right? Like
Absolutely.
we love the possibility of new things happening and we hate not knowing what will happen. And humor in some ways, it fundamentally is you giving up 100% control because you're saying, I'm going to put this out there and I hope that you respond in the way that I want you to, but you might not. You might not laugh at all. And then I've just taken a big swing and I'm just standing here. It's like you go for a high five and the other person doesn't high five you. There's no way to pretend that you weren't going for a high five. And
Right.
this is the emotional and verbal equivalent of that. So I think there's a real big piece of that. But I think it also is. I think people mistakenly think that people will like them more if they don't try for things like that.
Hmm. Yeah, and when things get especially fraught, humor can often be the first thing to go. And you argue, just by evidenced by the work that you do, but also I want to talk about the book that you're writing and so on about it. You argue that humor is essential for us, as you know, in all circumstances. Tell me, because not we're not all going to become stand-up comedians
No,
like you, and we all can say, "Oh, sure, I should go to more comedy shows and just have the experience of laughing." Even that is good, but specifically, tell me what you'd like to see people do in terms of embracing their own humor or incorporating humor into their lives.
yeah, I'm so glad you asked this because I think that at the risk of being like sounding like an academic professor here, I do think it's really important to like define the terms of what I mean when I say humor because I don't want everyone to go out and be a stand-up comedian. I also don't even want people to like necessarily tell jokes if that's not something natural to them. For me, what I and I also think there's a lot of forms of humor that are really dangerous and bad and cruel, right? I don't want any of that either, like bullying or offensive jokes or you can use humor in a very negative way. But what I think is really beautiful, and I do think everyone would benefit from, is this mindset that I think comedians and comedy writers that I know have, which is looking at the world around you, not denying the bad, not denying the terrible or the suffering, but finding the moments of the absurd, the incongruous, the hilarious, and finding ways to laugh at those. So to me, it's kind of like having a real sense of humor, a good sense of humor is the opposite of like toxic positivity, right? It's not like, there's always a silver lining to every cloud. A lot of times it's laughing about like, oh my God, there are so many more clouds. I cannot believe the clouds keep coming. Like that
Right.
alone can be a way, but it's also the opposite in a different way of this nihilistic pessimism that like things are only bad and they're only going to get bad and there's no point in anything. I think that aside from professional funny people, often the people who have the best senses of humor are people who work in very intense, stressful jobs because this is how you survive that. You laugh with your colleagues, you have a good time, you have silliness when you're in the emergency room or when you're in, when you're a lawyer who's working on with death row clients or when you are working a hard manual labor job. These are people who really laugh a lot and it's because it's a tool that lets you get through the hard times, which I think we
Mm.
need more than ever right now. I really think there's a lack of that.
Yeah, and what do you think contributes to the lack of that right now?
Well, one is there's a lot of terrible things happening. So it's hard to laugh at terrible things. Um, but that doesn't mean that there aren't ways to find the humor in it. So I think we are exposed to a world of horrors, and it seems like things are very bad and only going to get worse. And then also, I think there is this fear of connection and vulnerability, and humor relies on both of those things. Humor needs connection and vulnerability, and to me, there's three key pieces. This is what I write about in my book, which is coming out next year. Is to having a sense of humor, in my opinion, the three key pieces are being present, so noticing the things that are funny and strange and odd in the world around you. The second is being willing to laugh at yourself. So being able to look at yourself and not say, I am perfect. I should be worshiped and be strong and uh, impressive all the time. But to say, like, sometimes I'm a buffoon and I'm on a podcast and I'm listing three ways to be funny, and you're probably going to disagree with at least one of them. And then the third way is to take social risks, to put yourself out there, to like wear the silly hat, to make a silly joke, to reach out to someone. Um, that's how you make people laugh is by taking a social risk. And I think each and every one of those, there are real obstacles to in our modern world. There's real obstacles to being present. There's real obstacles to acknowledging your own faults and foibles and flaws. And there's real obstacles to taking social risks. People are afraid to do each and every one of those steps.
Mm. And yet it's so true that we, with some exceptions, and obviously you identified some cruel and perverse and unhelpful forms of humor, and it's more like mockery and things. But I mean, generally speaking, we are so appreciative when people do take those the social risk of being the person. And I listen. I showed up at a fairly institutional uh, building where I worked for many years as
Uh-huh.
the only person in a Halloween costume
That's
for all of the 10 years that I worked there. And after the first year of realizing, okay, so nobody else dresses up on Halloween, I decided I'm going to double down and I'm going harder, even harder next year. So
I
I,
love that. I love
I,
that.
well, I thank you, and I decided to love it, love it too, in spite of its occasional awkwardness. But so I do believe in the value of taking that social risk, both in terms of training ourselves to, yeah, we can handle. So you fall down and eggs on your face and you look like a jerk for showing up in a Halloween costume to do serious work, you know, but you can survive that. So it's good for us, but it's good for the people around us who appreciate us taking that risk or being vulnerable and willing to laugh at ourselves. So yeah, it's a good reminder that we hold ourselves back for no purpose in many ways,
Well,
right?
also just to take your example there, to me, this is the magic of humor. This is why I love laughter and comedy so much is you go to your office, it's Halloween, and you're like, everyone's going to be dressed up in costumes. So you have a costume and you show up and no one else is dressed up in costumes.
Uh-huh.
Okay, that is unquestionably uncomfortable. Now, you can either be ashamed and be like, this is the worst day of my life. And you might probably inevitably have some moments where you think,
There
like,
were
what
some flickers of that. Yep.
but then when you do it again the second year, knowing that no one else will be dressed up, it becomes a perfect, hilarious comedy bit. It's like everyone else is going to be wearing business casual or literal suits, and I am going to be dressed as a tiger or a firefighter or whatever it is. That is so funny to know that you will be the only person dressed. And the transformative part is if someone judged you last year and was like, wow, she does not get the culture of this room. Now they go, oh, wow, that's really funny. She's doing it again. That's her thing. To me, that is like how you own the parts of yourself and turn them from like something that should be shameful to something that you're proud of and that connects other people to you.
I know that you know all about taking those kinds of lessons from children because really that's kids are often unself-conscious and delightfully humorous and curious and open and playful, much more so than we adults tend to be. And you know this firsthand from you were a fifth grade teacher for a while, and you've got this great TED talk about that and what you learned from kids
Yes.
about uh, getting through hard things, facing unknowns. Tell me about some of the takeaways that you still carry with you, that you maybe learned from some of the kids in your classrooms.
Yeah. I mean, I still to this day think that like most of the funniest people that I've ever met, and I've, performed with really famous comedians. I still think that most of the funniest people I've ever met are elementary school students. Like the way that they see the world. I mean, there's something really fun about seeing the world through a kid's eyes because, they'll come up to you and totally honestly say like, horses are real, correct? And you'll say yes. And then they'll go, unicorns, not real. And you'll go, they're not real. And they go, okay, good to know. Like that for them, they're just like, you have to get the information somehow. So it's really funny to interact with people who are kind of in some way, they're like aliens from another planet that have come down and trying to figure out what's happening. But then the other thing is, when it comes to like laughing at yourself or being your own uninhibited self, no one no one needs to tell kids to be like their own uninhibited selves. Kids are the ones who'll be like, by the way, I love pickles. You can call me Mr. Pickle. And like, they'll tell you that, like that's a third grader who's just going to come up and say, the only thing I love in the world is pickles. I only want to talk about pickles. And like, she will just be Mrs. Pickles.
Yeah.
That's who she is. Whereas an adult, I think you kind of have to get them to loosen up a little bit before they go, I know that I'm not supposed to say my favorite food is just anything pickle flavored, but that's my favorite food. Is that weird? Kids like they don't mind that. So I spend a lot of my conscious effort to like strip away that what I'm supposed to be adult self and think like, what would the kid version say, do? What would they notice? And it doesn't mean that I always act on it, right? Like there's reasons why it's good that we're adults, but I think seeing the world, this is why a lot of parents talk about this, that like the joy of parenthood is you get to walk around and instead of it just being like, this is my commute to work, you notice, oh my gosh, there actually are so many fire hydrants. And my kid
Fire
is
trucks
pointing
and
out the
fire.
fire trucks and the
Yes,
fire hydrants are like,
exactly.
it's actually kind of cool the way that the trash compactor works. Like I didn't realize that actually is interesting how it happens. And I think we can do that for ourselves even without having a kid by just looking at the world through those new eyes.
You're in as I mentioned earlier, you've had so many ways in your career of trying to just force adults to get more face to face with humor and comedy. And one that I want you to tell me about, because I just love this so much. I saw a little video on YouTube about you doing the Living Room Comedy Club.
Oh, yes.
And
So
taking you take, because so many people, I know a lot of friends say, "Ah, every time I go to a comedy show, I think, why don't I go more often?" But we sometimes, for whatever reasons, tend not to. And you bring comedy shows right to people's living rooms. Tell me about that.
well, as a comedian, one of the things that you often have to struggle with is like, who is your audience? Who do you want to be your audience, and how will you reach them? And for me, one of the questions that I often had is like, maybe the people who I want to make laugh the most are not necessarily like the people who would go to a comedy club and pay money and want to have a 2 drink minimum. So as I was working out new material, I had this idea of like, what if I could go to people's homes in the middle of the afternoon and perform jokes there? I wonder if jokes would work differently. So I emailed everyone who was on my mailing list, and I said, if you're willing to host me in your home, I will do a comedy show, a totally new comedy show for free. I'll bring other comedians. We'll all be trying out new jokes and working new material. You can invite half of the audience, can be your friends and family, and then you have to let me sell tickets for the other half of it. And you can decide, maybe that means there's 10 people total, or maybe that means there's 30 people total. But what ended up happening is we had these really fascinating, such fun shows that kind of had the energy of a little bit of like a house party or a brunch, but also it was two groups of people that you wouldn't normally get to perform to. Like we did a show and everyone was like a married person over 65, or another show where it was like only sound artists in Brooklyn. And like that, those were the kinds of things where you get to just see how jokes work in different environments and what makes people laugh. And it was such a joy. And also, I think that kind of like child curiosity part that we were talking about before,
Yeah.
I love going into people's houses and just seeing how they live. But it was also
Right.
so fun to hear what people talked about before the show even started, to just be walking around and eavesdropping.
And there's something about, just from watching your video anyway, about democratizing comedy performance and you're sort of stripped bare. You're showing people, okay, this is me hauling my little buggy full of the bits and pieces, and I'm right here. I'm
Mhm.
absolutely exposed 2 feet away from you in your living room. Again, it feels like it's part of your whole ethos of just shoving humor into people's faces and reminding them that this is right here for you. And that's how I partly viewed it anyway. Like I hear you saying it's a good way to workshop your material, but it also felt like a good reminder that comedy and humor can happen anywhere and it doesn't have to be a formal experience that involves, finding parking and the 2 drink minimum. And it just can happen anywhere, and bringing it into our own lives in any way we can.
Yeah, well, I love that. I agree with it. I think you might be ascribing even more brilliance to me than I think is due. But I will certainly say I 100% agree that finding laughter and humor should not have to involve finding parking, or this does not need to involve finding parking. And I think that something that I do think is different about the way that I philosophically think about comedy and humor than other performers necessarily is, um, I really think of comedy as a tool rather than an end in and of itself. And it's great. Some people think of, if your goal is just to make people laugh, I have no judgment on that. But for me, I always am trying to figure out, how can I make you laugh and then use that to get you to pay attention to something else. So maybe it's pay attention to the world. Maybe it's pay attention to important information. Maybe it's pay attention to science. And maybe it is to have this communal experience there. You have this memory that you wouldn't have had otherwise because you went to a stranger's apartment in the city that you live.
Tell me more about that drive. Why is that important to you to see comedy as a tool for something else?
I think that some performers start comedy and they realize, wow, I have this really important thing to say. And this is letting me express my true self. And it's so affirming and healing and beautiful, or just really fun, that like people are hearing me in this way. And I think for me, I had a little bit of the opposite, where when I started performing, I was teaching at this elementary school. I really liked being a teacher, but it was a stressful job. It was a school where a lot of kids were below the poverty line and had really tough situations outside. And so I was performing and I was spending time at this theater as a way to just have a release, the release of laughter. Um, but as more people started to come to see me perform and I started to be more successful, I kept having this feeling of like, it's a responsibility to have 30 people in a room listening to me for an hour. And what am I leaving them with? I just kept thinking like, it's fun that they're laughing, but like they're going to leave with that guy has some great stories about babysitting. Like it just didn't feel important.
Mm.
And I felt like I talked to a lot of people in my life who had really important things to say and no one was listening to them. And I felt like there's this clear mismatch where like I have a platform and don't really have a clear message, and these people have a clear message and no platform. So maybe I can use this for that. And then also on the selfish side, using comedy in that way lets me make jokes about things that are more unique, right? Like every comedian could make a joke about dating or, about social media, but not many comedians are making jokes about like sea urchin mating. But I get to like talk to a scientist about who studies sea urchin mating, and then I have a joke that no one else could ever have, which that's really artistically rewarding as well.
Right, so your show Wrong Answers Only, where you have scientists and comedians and you are ultimately communicating, the scientist is ultimately communicating and you're helping with the humorous crew, important research that they're doing,
Yeah.
and you get to do it through laughter. I also was thinking, watching some of your Wrong Answers Only, um, shows, that you're striking a beautiful balance, which is essentially what you've just described, but between comedy and serious information, between wanting to learn and get answers, but to also keep laughing, which, if I may, seems like a recipe for getting through uncertain times like we're in right now. I mean, we need to keep informed and stay on top of what is happening in our world. And yet we have to obviously really balance how much we let the news consume us all together, and we have to keep our sense of humor and stuff. So it's kind of, anyway, I just observed that that's a pretty good model for how to do it. Stay curious, keep up with the facts, and keep laughing.
I hope so. I mean, that is certainly my goal. That is my professional goal, is to like use humor to get people who wouldn't hear important information otherwise to not only hear it, but to want to hear it, to come back, right? Eager to hear more. Um, I often think that humor is maybe most effective when it's like the thin end of the wedge. So, hey, I would have never thought about deforestation in the Amazon rainforest. But then if you hear me interview a comedian and it's your favorite comedian, and we happen to be talking about that with a scientist who studies that, that might open the door to you saying, well, let me go read that person's book or click on their website or watch a video with them and then learn more. And now that's the thin part. We've cracked open the door and you can walk through. I think that my skill set isn't so well suited to opening the door all the way and getting them all of the depth. But I think getting them so in a place where now they have the tools to find it themselves, I think that's my hope and my goal.
That must be, yeah, it's super satisfying for you at a perhaps for you anyway, a richer level than just cracking jokes about social media, as you said. What do you
I
think?
bet you must feel this way too, though, right? Like to me, my favorite thing in the world, always, forever, before I did any of this for money, is talking to funny people and talking to smart people. And like,
Oh,
I mean, you get to do this. You get to say, like, I'm interested in that person. I'm going to interview them. Like, that is unreal. I cannot believe that this is the kind of thing that I get to do for a living. Just such a joy. And I feel like you must feel somewhat similarly.
I absolutely do. No, I absolutely do. This I chose to do this. I leapt into the unknown,
Mm,
quit my established career as a broadcaster, and decided to try new things. And this is what I wanted to do.
mm.
So yes, it feels like a calling and a passion and a joy indeed to be having these kinds of conversations. And that sense of purpose and fulfillment, that I get from that. I wonder what you think laughter and humor, because you're clearly a very optimistic, energetic, positive, enthusiastic person, so you would seem. Uh, what role is laughter and humor in that cocktail, do you think?
I think it's the main ingredient for me. For me personally, it's the main ingredient.
But
Uh,
is that because it it keeps heavier, weightier, darker thoughts at bay? Is it because it that joy is kind of contagious and other people feed it back to you and it just kind of grows and spirals up? Or what do you
I mean,
think?
my short answer is yes to everything you said.
I know.
Yes, yes to all of that. I mean, I think that just even on a structural level, the way that humor often works is you build tension, and then the laughter releases that tension. So for me, I it's lovely that I come across to you as someone who is like optimistic and energetic and happy, and right now, I feel like that because I'm having a great time talking to you. But certainly, there are many times where I feel so low energy and so beaten down by the world, and by the news and by the sense of hopelessness and despair. But I've never felt like that while I'm laughing. I think it's not possible to feel like that while you're laughing.
I think you're right.
And
Yeah.
I think that that is why humor is if so important and essential to doing hard work, to doing the work of changing the world or dealing with suffering or dealing with grief is it's not again, it's not denying it, right? I think it's easy to be like you can be a really happy person because you just are the most ignorant person in the world, right? Like nothing bad's going on. It's all good as the world burns around you. But I think that if you want to engage with the hard parts, the humor is a way to eh, take that pressure, that tension that builds up and release it. And for me, it's also this real way to find connection. Like the times when I laugh the hardest are not at all because I like heard a joke or wrote a joke or saw a movie. It's because I'm connecting with a friend or a family member and we are laughing about something that honestly is like indescribable because it's not even that funny outside of this moment, but we're laughing so hard that tears are streaming down our faces. And it's because like my dad says, don't take a photo right now and then trips or something. It's something really small and silly.
Right.
Um, and those moments are just such pure connection and catharsis, and that for me is how do you handle the unknown and also the terrors of the world, the modern world. It is through that.
Do you think I just thought of this as you were describing that laughter with tears streaming down your face. Do you think that laughter is like a muscle and the more we access it, the better we I'm assuming a lot of this stuff is going to be in your book that comes out
Yes.
next year about how it's important to have humor in our lives. But I wonder if it's y- almost like jogging. I mean, the more you do it, the stronger you get and the faster you can complete your marathon. I mean, is it true with
I
laughing as well?
100% think that. That's the biggest pushback that I got when I started telling people what I was going to write a book about is like how to have a better sense of humor and how to laugh more in your everyday life. People understandably were like, "Well, you are a comedian. Of course you're going to laugh every day." But like I've met a person, I met Doug in accounting and he is not funny and he's never going to be funny. And
Poor accountants, by the way.
I know,
They're
I'm so
the
sorry.
default fill-in. No,
You're
I
always my
know.
default. It used
They're
to be
always
lawyers.
everybody's a default
Yeah.
fill-in for accountants. I'm
Yeah.
sure there's lots of funny accountants, but I hear you.
Well, here's what I'll say is I believe there are lots of funny accountants. And even
Yeah.
if you're not a funny accountant, I absolutely deeply, deeply, deeply believe that anyone can improve this, that it is a muscle, it's a skill that you can build. And, um, the same way with your running example, right? Like saying that you can get better at running doesn't mean that you're going to win the Boston Marathon, right? It's not like you could be the funniest person in the world if you're going from the least funny person. But what I really believe is that anyone can start to see the world in this different way, can be more present, can be more willing to laugh at themselves, can be more willing to take these small risks. And there's so much actual academic research that shows that your life will be better if you do that, right? There's tons of studies that show that people think if I talk to a stranger on the bus, it's going to go badly. They're going to hate me. I'm going to have a horrible day. And then when they do it, their day is so much better that they way overestimate how bad it will be and way underestimate how good it will be. And I think that humor is like that, where you test against reality a little bit and you start to see the funny things and you find the things that are idiosyncratic to you that you laugh at. And then when you're noticing stuff, you notice more of it and you attract more people. And to me, one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book and why I felt like this is something that I wish the general public knew more is there's so much science and advice saying like loneliness is an epidemic and we need to be more connected to other people. But all of that kind of feels like exhausting to me. Like, oh God, I got to make more plans and I have to go to these clubs of like the hiking club. Or it's so hard to meet people and to build connections, except when you're having a sense of humor, when you're laughing with people, then you become magnetic. Then people just come to you. They want to be around you and you want to be around them because you're laughing together. So, and I very, very, very much believe that that's a skill that you can build.
You
And for
can
people who are
learn.
skeptical, think about why you laugh so much harder with friends that you've known forever than with someone who you met like a week ago. It's because you build this muscle together of your shared vocabulary and your shared experiences.
There's so much of what you're saying that reminds me of meditation, which is maybe a leap. But when you think about the idea of being present,
Mhm.
which you've described as a requisite for humor, being present to what's happening immediately, that sense of and it's part of being present, but that sense of release, that nothing else, you stop thinking about the uncertainties and terrors of the world when you're laughing. You're in that actual moment. You are so um, freed from all of the whatever else is plaguing you, whatever fears and things, and the idea that it is a muscle that you can practice and get better at. Anyway, there's have you ever thought about those comparisons, like laughter
100%.
as meditation?
Absolutely. In fact, you saying that just I was like, oh, I have the perfect quote for this. I just pulled up a quote from Pema Chodron, who in one of her books wrote, thinking about
Who's the
this.
American Buddhist nun for people who are yeah, yeah,
And
go ahead.
so writing and thinking about this link between meditation and humor says the key ingredient in flexibility, that kind of flexibility that she's pushing for, is the key ingredient in that flexibility is humor. Having a sense of humor implies that you're open to how things spontaneously occur. You don't have such fixed notions of how it all has to go and how you have to be. In fact, what's often most hilarious is when you're trying to make things go one way and they end up going in a totally wrong direction. Like you're trying to paint your room beige and it turns out pink. I love that. I like that is exactly right about humor. And that is exactly right about meditation is like you accept what it is, you let it go, and then you're so much happier as a result.
Which again, to tie it into sort of navigating unknowns, is so much of what we can get anxious about is stuff that hasn't happened yet,
Mhm.
and is stuff that we feel we have to get control over and wonder how we possibly could. And so forcing I always say I've said to so many people, 'cause I did a lot of improv in the past, and I always say to people, like, everybody should do improv classes just because it teaches you about life, as it's sort of a metaphor for life, that you can fall down, you can make mistakes, you can be a goof, and you just keep going, and there's no it just kind of builds that resilience and that habit of letting go of control, and you have to be hyper present to not know, and again, those are all applicable more broadly to navigating all the uncertainties of life.
I think that I love that you did improv, and I agree. I think it's I think it's a class and a thing that many people could really benefit from. And I think it's interesting that people often think of stand up as like humor when they think of humor because stand up is planned, and in some ways the magic
Yes,
trick of stand up is
scripted.
you
Mhm.
try and say a thing so that it seems like you're just thinking about it for the first time, but you've said it 100 times before. Whereas improv, the magic is you say something that you've never said before, and you make it seem like that must have been scripted because it's so perfect.
That's
Um,
right.
and the thing that I love about improv that I think is really at the core of this kind of humor that I'm pushing for is the central tenet of improv is make the other person look good. Don't make yourself
Yes.
look good. If you see a big joke, try and get the other person to get the laugh. Don't take it for yourself. And I think that's such a necessary skill, and to listen really closely to other people.
And a lovely, yeah, again, motto for life as well.
Mhm,
So your book about finding more humor is coming out next year, but you wrote a book, maybe last year or the year
mhm.
before, Let's Hang Out.
Yeah.
And about tell me a little bit about that because that interests me too. The value of community,
Mhm.
and the ways that the people around us, not even our necessarily our close and established family and friends, but literally our community, the people, as the song went in Sesame Street, who are the people in your neighborhood?
Uh-huh.
The those smaller interactions, which we became aware of when we lost them during COVID and we had to have masks and couldn't even see the face of the barista giving us our coffee. But I mean, we became aware of the psychological benefit and the boost that we get from those interactions with people we see and maybe don't even know their name. But tell me a little bit about your book, Let's Hang Out, and what you think about those relationships and how they shape our community and our well-being.
Yeah, I mean, it really came out of exactly what you were just describing. That this sense that like during the pandemic lockdowns, we lost all of these big interactions, the like friends, the family, the close personal people. But that we also I feel like there was this real loss of the small kind of low stakes everyday interactions. And it struck me that even when we came back out of lockdown and we were moving around the world again, that those those relationships were not really getting the respect that I think they deserve. They weren't really thought of. In fact, if you think about it, we really don't even have words for a lot of these people, right? There's like
Yeah.
friend and acquaintance, and then there's nothing in between. And even friend is so broad. So I started thinking about like, what would it be like to actually kind of quantify who these people are, and like, why does it make such a huge difference in my day if I'm walking down the street and I see my neighbor walking her dog and I don't even know her name, but we nod and smile at each other. Like that is such a different interaction than being out and not running into anyone that I know. Um, so I was thinking about that and kind of tried to come up with some like, joking names for each of these people, right? Like someone whose name you don't know, but you know their face. You go, hey, you, hey there, how's it going? Hey, there's. But I also, as I got deeper into it and started interviewing people and doing research, it just became really clear that like this is very important to our happiness and to our health. And that I think a lot of people, not just me, even post lockdown, feel like there's this sense of dislocation and this sense of disconnection. And that I think a lot of that is we want these deep, close, vulnerable relationships, but we don't know how to get them necessarily. And we don't realize that these things are a funnel where you start with saying hello, you start with introducing yourself to your neighbor, you start with, having a small, very low stakes chat, and then that can lead to these closer and deeper friendships. But um, I think many people just kind of sit at home, sad and alone, and it feels impossible as to how you get to that place of closeness. So that this was
Mm.
an attempt to try and figure that out.
I love it. I think that's a much under discussed um, truth for as you've described so well. So I'm really glad that that book is out there. I'm also really glad, and the last thing I want to ask you about is your podcast. That your podcast is out
Mm.
there. How to Be a Better Human, a roaring success. I also want to know what you think. I mean, obviously, your work in various forms to democratize comedy, to bring humor into our lives, to make us recognize the value of humor and our ability to see the world more humorously, no matter how hard it may be. You're doing all that work as part of trying to make people's lives better. Um, so this your podcast, How to Be a Better Human. Why do you think it's so successful? Because I guess we're all trying to make our lives better better in one way or another.
Yeah, I'm happy to give you a couple of hypotheses because I've definitely thought about this before. But I will also say, because you have done such deep research and are being so generous in your questions and your praise, I do feel like I am in quite a dangerous position for a comedian, which is I have been praised and built up and told to be good and wise and intelligent. And I just want to say, it's very important for me to say, I am also a buffoon and you should not listen to anything I say. You should take everything I say with a big grain of salt. Who am I? I have no PhD in life. I have no master's degree in life. I am you know, I'm not an expert. I'm just the guy who's trying to
But you
figure it out.
talk to the experts
That's
on your
right.
podcast.
Exactly.
Yes.
I
I
am
see where you're going
I
there.
am at best second to third hand wisdom, and I will accept that. That seems correct. Um, I think that the reason why the podcast has been really successful, far more successful than I would have ever expected it to be, and I think then I think Ted would certainly tell you than they ever expected it to be when they hired me, is I do think it comes from this mindset that we've been talking about. This even though very few episodes of our show are edited in any way trying to get laughs or jokes. Very few episodes are like laugh out loud funny at all. I think the conversations, they're all through this mindset of like the improv mindset of there's no such thing as a mistake, of trying to make the other person look good. But I also think, um, I've always said, right, like, I want you. It's okay to laugh at me if I ask something that's like silly or obvious. It's fine if you laugh and say that's ridiculous. I don't mind being ridiculous, and I think people have responded to that energy and that kind of approach, which is I really go into conversations with these smart, brilliant people, and I want them to share how brilliant and smart they are. But I also want to know, like, what would a regular person do if we're not as, if I'm not the expert on the philosophy of consciousness, and I'm probably not going to be, how would that change my daily life? What would just a regular person do with that? And I think that approach has been really, um, really interesting. And I think it's pulled a lot of cool things out of people that they wouldn't normally say in interviews.
Well, and the astrophysicists aren't probably listening to your podcast interview with the astrophysicist. It's just normal folk who don't know the answers either. So,
exactly.
so yeah, you got to ask the dumb questions because we all
Yeah.
probably have them. So,
You know,
um,
I just want to share because it's so related to one of the things we've been talking about is one of my favorite psychological studies of all time. It's just so related to what we're talking about. I found this in my research for the book is, um, they did this study and they had 4 hypothetical job candidates come in for an interview. Okay. So 2 of the job candidates were bad at the job. They just didn't do the job well. And then 2 did the job really well. And so, of course, when they asked people, who do you like most? Who do you think we should hire for this job? Everyone said we should not hire the people who are bad for the job. We should hire the people who are good for the job. But between the good at the job candidates who were identical in every way, the only difference was before they came in for the interview, one of them tripped and spilled a coffee all over their shirt. And with the vast majority of people rated the coffee spiller as more competent and more likable and that they should get the job. And so I always think about that, where it's like the coffee spiller who was bad at the job, no one wanted that person in there. But between being perfect and good at your job and imperfect and good at your job, people like you more and want to be around you and think you are better if you allow them to see that you sometimes trip and pour coffee all over yourself. That is the
I
ideal.
love that. That is such a fabulous. Oh, look at that! My phone ringing.
That's perfect.
In the middle
That's
of
what I'm
our
saying.
podcast.
You're not supposed to be
This
perfect.
is my
You're supposed to have
imperfection.
weird
I have my phone on do not disturb,
I
and
also
still my
love that
mother
ringtone.
rings through.
That is
That's my mom's ringtone.
that is a perfect ringtone for a mom. It's like, okay, well,
It kind of is.
there's a little quacking going on back here.
I love that our imperfection in the podcast. We're very professional here at
That's
A
what I'm
Love Affair
saying.
with
No
the
one wants
Unknown.
that. They want to hear your mom's ringtone pop through in
Well,
the background.
they got it, and right on
That's the
cue.
audio
You'd
equivalent
think
of a
I
coffee.
timed that one.
It really is.
It's the wabi-sabi. Everything's more beautiful when it looks a little broken and put back together. Chris, what a treat to talk with you. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
this was such a pleasure.
Um, this was really fun, and I feel like you've offered up so much energetic and enthusiastic encouragement about how to handle all the unknowns of life with a good laugh. So, good luck with your book.
Thank
It's
you
a
so
good one.
much.